in every box from Oakland Heart on Metairie Road.
It's now 6:30 p.m. Sunday, and the hurricane is really beginning to be felt here.
Your problems with the real high tides are going to come a little later as the storm passes your area. The reconnaissance aircraft indicated that it had moved a little further north than it had before, and it's now moving again. Those of you that have watched these storms over the years know as the outer rim of the storm starts coming in contact with the land, it tends to slow the whole system down a little bit and make it a little difficult to get the storm into the coastline. I hope that doesn't happen in this particular case. You know that I was really worried about any little change in course because
I want to thank the viewers. You people you're the most sensitive weather-wise, and you have enriched my life immeasurably, and I thank you.
Mr. Hurricane, a gale force who is right as rain. Those are just three of the ways people have described Nash Roberts over the years. And here are three more: gentleman, genius, and legend. Hello, I'm Angela Hill. Over the next half hour, we'll look back on the life and legendary career of this giant of New Orleans broadcasting. We'll revisit some of the conversations we had with him over the years about his life, his career, and the storms that put him in the spotlight. His is a story of talent and skill, knowledge and longevity. And best of all, it's written with a simple felt tip marker. In the high-tech world of television weather forecasting, we have computers and graphics and machines that can follow the route of a tornado. But when it comes to the dreaded hurricane season, all the high-tech equipment in the world couldn't compete with this man, with his simple map and famous felt-tip pen. When Nash Roberts spoke, people listened and believed.
This area could make a big difference where the storm hits out here.
Exactly 50 years ago, Nash became the first TV meteorologist in New Orleans. It was a job he never saw himself in. In 1946, Nash had returned from the war. He took his saved Navy pay, $3,500, and opened a weather consulting office in the 100 block of Camp Street, the first in the South. His clients were oil companies, barge, diving, and fishing companies.
Every day we had something big going on in which everything hinged on the weather. So it surely kept you on your toes, and it kept you awake at night sometimes.
Lives depended on his weather calculations.
And believe me, once you told them to go out, and if somebody walked up behind you and sneezed, it felt like 40 miles an hour. You know? It was
huge responsibility. 5 years later, he was asked to broadcast the weather on the local NBC affiliate. He refused. He was a scientist, he said, not a TV guy, until a local advertising man gave him an offer he couldn't refuse: a trip to Chicago.
He said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll play your way to Chicago, to the NBC studios. I think it was Marshall Field building or something up there. He said, I will pay your way up there and back and introduce you to a guy who doesn't know beans about weather and is making $80,000 a year doing weather shows. I said, well, I'll go. So
he went and watched, and his confidence was built.
Let's go back. I can do that. I mean, I know I can do it.
And for 5 decades he has, from the horror of Hurricane Audrey in 1957 to the heart-stopping threat of Georges in 1998. Nash has been there with his simple map, felt-tip pen, and a lifetime of weather wisdom. Now about that pen, he gives his father-in-law, who sold office supplies, all the credit.
And among his articles that he sold was an outfit called Vaporite pens. And they were felt-tip pen with a fast-drying ink in them. He had these things. I said, let me try them. And I've never stopped.
Not that today's technology hasn't helped the science of meteorology. Computers, radar, satellites that didn't exist when he began in 1951 are all great tools to be used to forecast. But Nash says it will always take the human mind to interpret the data.
If this person doesn't understand the physics involved, the physics of the atmosphere or whatever it is, they're never going to come up with a good forecast. Meteorologists I'm leaving behind, I think they're doing a great job. They're fine. They're young, they're intelligent, and they're interested in what they're doing, and that's what it takes.
Nash Roberts helped define that passion for weathercasting. But then again, that's how he's lived his whole life, with passion. Whether as a businessman, a scientist, a teacher, a farmer, a beekeeper, or an art collector. But now it is his great love for his wife that takes him out of broadcasting.
She went to McMain and I went to Fort Shaver.
Lydia and Nash married 60 years ago.
She's been home, as I said, taking care of the kids during the hurricanes, and when they grew up and went away, she was by herself. She's a very gutsy gal.
Always by his side, always supportive of his adventures, Lydia was his strength during his recent illnesses.
I was in and out of the hospital several times in the year 2000.
While Nash recovered, his beloved Lydia would not be so fortunate.
Some mysterious disease that won't let her walk. Her legs won't work anymore, and besides that, she has macular degeneration and she's legally blind, so she can't be left alone or anything. She cannot fend for herself.
And because of that, Nash retired for good in 2001, saying at the time that being with the love of his life meant more than anything.
I don't know what I'd do without her. And somebody says that they sympathize with me for the fact that I have to do all this and do that. I said, I wouldn't want it any other way. I actually prayed that I would outlive her so I could take care of her, and that's the way it's working out.
Nash and a team of nurses cared for Lydia day and night.
She just gradually got to the point where her brain didn't do what it was supposed to.
For the next 6 years, he never left her side, till one morning about a year ago.
I took some time out from the bedroom and came in here and was reading the paper, and my son Ken was in there with her, and he came and looked at me. He came in and he said, "Dad, Mom just passed." Yeah, my whole world crumbled in, I'll tell you. And I've never really recovered. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever recover.
He met Lydia through his girlfriend at the time, a woman who was more friend than date. They often took walks through their Broadmoor neighborhood, but one day, his girlfriend took him a different route.
She said, "I just wanted to change." And we accidentally bumped into a girl standing in front of her house. This is Lydia. And they put on a little show like, "Oh, what are you doing?"
It was a setup.
Well, I was set up.
It was a setup that lasted 66 years.
The finest moment of my whole life.
Together they raised 2 sons who gave them 4 grandchildren, who gave them 6 great-grandchildren. It was because of Lydia's frail condition when Hurricane Katrina was building in the Gulf that Nash did something he had never done.
For the first time in history, I evacuated.
They lived in an Episcopal retirement home in Baton Rouge for 2 months, watching as many did.
I was trying to analyze what was happening to what neighborhoods.
Horrified as everyone was. But as a scientist, Nash looks at weather disasters from Katrina to the more recent cyclone in Myanmar and earthquake in China, and sees these events not caused by years of man disrespecting the earth, as some fear, but more as a natural process.
I would say probably like it happened to me, a normal aging. Things begin to fall apart. And the older your planet gets, I guess the more changes you're going to run into.
The thoughts of a man who has lived in what he calls the most productive century in history.
I was here for the beginning of aviation.
And the space age, the computer age, and of course, the birth of television, something he never dreamed he'd be part of.
I told him I wasn't cut out to do that sort of thing. No dramatic training and no this, no that.
It didn't matter. For 50 years, he did it his way. As the scientist he was, with his mark-slot and map, feeling very strongly about keeping his professional independence, choosing to never be an employee of the television station, but rather a private contractor whose weather decisions would be his own.
It cost me a lot of money, but I never was in a profit sharing, never in a retirement plan. But I don't regret it. A lot of times the things I said weren't popular with other meteorologists. So I always wanted to be happy and liked by everybody, but you can't do that if you're dealing with people's lives.
It is perhaps his integrity that came through the screen those 50 years, his believability. Nash was a child of the Depression. He saw his father lose his very good-paying job to work any job to feed his 5 sons. It was a defining time in a young boy's life.
Made me try to take care of myself financially. The family always laughed at me, but as a little boy, I had something going all the time to make a few nickels.
He grew into a man who had many things going. He became a pilot, a meteorologist, a businessman, an investor, a teacher, a farmer, a beekeeper, a Christmas tree grower. He lived by a phrase he learned as a child: always have an anchor to the wind.
So that if the wind blows, it won't blow you onto the rocks. And I'll always remember that. I always had a little anchor somewhere.
A life of hard work and interesting experiences. What has been some of the best times of your life?
The best thing to happen to me in my whole lifetime was a no-brainer. That's the night that girl introduced me to Lydia. And that's the most pleasing and momentous thing that happened to me.
Nash called Lydia the best thing that ever happened to him. And some would call Nash's first day on television one of the best things that ever happened to New Orleans. It brought his unique set of skills to a much broader audience, who came to appreciate his gift for simply explaining the science of weather.
The first time that I appeared on television was either 48 or 49, when, of course, at that time the only station on the air was Channel 6, and it was at the top of the Hibernia Bank building. That was where the studio was. And I didn't work for them. I had my consulting weather service, and they got hold of me when there was a storm coming and asked me if I would do something for them in the news program. And so I said, okay, I'll go. My office was on Camp Street in those days, my weather office, and I just walked from there to Hibernia Bank building. Never seen television before. And I got upstairs, top of the Hibernia Bank building, and the camera was in the hall shooting through the doorway into what was the studio, just an office with a canvas backdrop and a guy sitting at a desk. I don't even remember who he was at the time, but anyhow, they pushed me in past the camera and in there, and I had all my little things, of course it was black and white in those days, there's no color, but I had my little maps and everything, and I did that routine for them.
Competitors from other stations and forecasters from other cities often laughed when they saw Nash on TV with his marker in hand and back turned to the audience. Technology, he said, was no match for that marker, and he explained his style as simply that of a teacher at the front of a classroom.
This is the way I planned to do it. I didn't have any, I had done a lot of teaching, but I didn't have any training in acting or announcing and all this sort of bull. So I said, look, if I'm going to do this thing, when the tally light goes on, I'm going to be talking to you. In other words, I want to talk to this person like he's a friend of mine, somebody I've known all my life. and just do it that way. And because I was afraid that when the tally light went on, I wouldn't be able to say anything. I'd freeze up, you know, or I'd be a sort of affectation type thing. And so I made up my mind. I said, it's just like I talk to my students. In the classroom, I'd pick a guy, a gal, or something and talk to them. And it worked beautifully. I never did have a bit of trouble with it. Of course, I turned my back on the audience, which they said it would never work, but it did. In the early days of TV, you could not turn your back on the audience. You had to face the audience, face the lights, the camera, and talk to them that way. And when I did the first, of course, when I used to teach meteorology, I couldn't always be looking at the class. I'd talk to them, and then I'd illustrate on the map or on the chalkboard, and then turn around and talk to them again. And when I first did that on TV, the advertising agencies, people went ape. They said, you can't do that. You can't turn your back on the audience. I said, well, that's the way I do it. You know, I'm going to do it. And I never had a bit of trouble with it. They had some jokes made about it on some people from up north and this place here and there, saying that, look at this guy, turns his back at the audience, to the audience, and talks to the map, you know. I said, it was one thing about the map, it didn't talk back to me.
Whether in front of his map or at work in the office, Nash was a local legend. In 1993, another legend, Bill Elder, took a behind-the-scenes look at the master at work on his birthday. This is a special conversation between two very special people.
In the office of Nash Roberts, and
Oh, come on.
it's Nash Roberts' birthday today. And Nash, happy birthday. We'd like to ask you, which one is it?
Oh, you really want to know?
Yeah, I really want to know.
It's Big 75.
Oh, boy.
3/4 of a century.
And what are you doing but working just as hard as you ever did work? Huh?
Working on the weather as usual, every day, all day.
Listen, could you give us a little tour of your weather office here? A lot of people have, you know, they've seen it during hurricanes, but I think only from one perspective.
Well,
And I was wondering if you might
this-
walk around, show us.
yeah, okay. This is my office, and with all the paraphernalia on the walls and that sort of stuff. And this is where I do a lot of the research on long-range forecasting and handling the clients, the various clients we have. And then this area out in here is the actual forecast area. These are all the instruments that are on the roof. Remote reading, telemetering instruments with temperature, humidity, wind direction, wind velocity.
Nash, you always did work out of this office, even though you were doing the weather for WWL.
Oh yeah, everything was always done here. That was kind of an advantage that I had, in that when I went on the air, I had been working all day with the weather. In other words, for my clients and everything, and had spent the whole day doing that. These are upper air charts. You as a pilot know all about that, but they're different levels, from 5,000 feet to 10 to 18,000 feet on up to 30,000 feet, where the jet stream is in that zone. And we do these surface charts. We're one of the few people still left that start with a blank map. And we analyze and decode everything that comes in, plot it on the map by hand, and then analyze the map for the fronts and the lows. This is the way the map looks when we start. This is the map that we'll be doing at noon, and there is nothing on it. And you actually have to plot 500 or 600 stations by hand. And the theory that I have in that is that,
And this is the finished product.
that's the finished product. When a meteorologist actually decodes the weather from each station, plots it by hand, and analyzes the map to draw the fronts and the isobars, he sees a lot more of what's going on. He's a lot more familiar with what's going on than if he just tears a piece of paper off the fax machine, these smaller maps. We get all of that material, but we still do the old-fashioned.
Nash, everybody equates you with your prognostication on hurricanes, but actually you're looking at everything, impulses.
Every day and every little nuance, and that's what makes the difference.
Bill Elder returned to Nash's office 6 years later after Hurricane George put him in the national spotlight. Nash's accurate forecasting of the 1998 storm got the attention of the New York Times and People magazine, which wrote that when it comes to tracking hurricanes in the Gulf, no one matches meteorologist Nash Roberts. The next year, in 1999, Bill Elder looked at what went into Nash's predictions and his forecasting philosophy.
The ability to gather data about hurricanes has increased tremendously in recent years. Satellites help us pinpoint their location. Weather buoys and hurricane hunters can measure their wind speed and barometric pressure. As yet, no one can make long-range forecasts that says where a hurricane is going to hit. But as a storm bears closer, the person who most consistently comes the closest to predicting its landfall is Nash Roberts.
But that Mississippi Gulf Coast could, anywhere from Gulfport over to Pascagoula, could be in the target area. And
from his office in a century-old French Quarter building, Nash takes note of the many possible storm tracks proposed by National Hurricane Center computers, but he does not rely on the computer himself.
I plot every reconnaissance report and completely analyze it. Every ship report, every buoy report, all the satellite data. In other words, we do hourly plotting. We just plot, and analyze.
Nash, how many elements are we talking about now, and what it takes for you to come up with the final decision on where this storm is going?
What it takes is, number one, to understand the physics of the storm to begin with, the mechanics of what's going on in there. And then the second thing is you have to see what's happening in the environment to steer it, whether it be the winds aloft or whether it be a blocking high, the rotation of the earth, whatever it is. Once you have a handle on what's making it move in a certain direction, half the job is done. Then you have to look downstream to see if there's anything going to change the emphasis of a particular type of steering.
Nash applied those 3 steps to his prediction on Hurricane George.
In the case of George, the thing that turned out to be the basic steering mechanism is this diagram here. That is the upper high pressure system, and the storm moves along the bottom of that ridge. And I had to decide when this ridge was going to quit moving west and allow the storm to turn north. But in the initial turn, it turned right for New Orleans. But I knew that as it progressed further north, the tendency is due to the deflective force of the earth, was to turn it more north. And eventually, when it got to a certain latitude, it was going to run into the bottom of the westerlies. And that's made me sure that it was not going to make New Orleans.
Even with more than 50 years of experience, Nash says tracking a hurricane never gets easier.
Okay, so it's going to be a long night for you again, Nash?
It is. That's the way it is. Sometimes you have to work 4 or 5 days straight, and I stay here most of the time. I have a sleeping bag upstairs, and my son Nash and I work together, and Bill and all of us, we just put whatever they are, and even our secretary, whatever it takes to do the job.
Nash Roberts may be gone, but the details of more than 50 years of his hurricane forecast are well documented. When he retired in 2001, Nash donated a treasure trove of local history to the Monroe Library at Loyola University. Included are mementos and papers spanning Nash's entire career back to 1947. In donating his papers to Loyola, Nash said he wanted them to be preserved in a place where they could be used by future generations for research. Like the hurricanes Nash Roberts spent a lifetime tracking, he was known by simply one name. That's a testament to the respect and admiration New Orleanians had for him. His words carried weight. His work earned him respect. And in so many ways, his legacy will live on.